Ms. Ros-Lehtinen from Florida, 5 minutes.
Jump ahead of anybody here because I came kind of last.
Actually, you're next on the list.
All right, I like it.
So.
Well, then, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. As we look around the region, as these wonderful panelists have pointed out, what we see is deeply troubling. Democracy has been slowly eroding in the countries in the region by the hands of elected tyrants who use populist promises of reform and change, and then they twist their systems into convenient arrangements where they retain the final word. And one needs no further proof to see how countries are following this undemocratic principles and have changed their constitutions to fit their whims, like Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua. And leaders of these countries do not believe in the rule of law, separation of powers, constitutional order, free and fair elections, an impartial judicial system. We've seen how these leftist experiments have led many countries to curtail basic freedoms. These illegitimate institutions are often utilized for the financial advantage of members of their own regime to illicitly make money off the backs of their own suffering people. And corruption is one of the greatest problems facing the region at this point. An economy tainted with corruption cannot sustain an environment necessary to create the conditions for greater economic development. Venezuela is a good example of this. It's a sham of a country, and it's a great deal of corruption going on there. You see the store shelves literally empty, yet Maduro goes on all of these fancy trips. They have archaic systems like artificial currency controls that are exploited by the connected elites and denied to the private sector. Many surrounding the regime have made themselves rich at the expense of the average Venezuelan, giving rise to the phenomenon of self-professing socialists who display a great preference for owning luxury homes and luxury vehicles. And just recently, Maduro arrested Venezuelans for the gall of having them wait in line for food, and has gone so far as arresting pharmaceutical executives and blaming them for the medical shortages in the country. In reality, as we know, Maduro has no one to blame but himself. And these are corrupt practices that are reprehensible and cannot but hurt the welfare of the people. And without a doubt, they're contributing factors to the near state of collapse that we see in Venezuela's economy. And against corrupt abuses of this sort, the U.S. must always be vigilant, and our goal should always be clear: to support and defend those who fight to expose and fight to end corruption. So I ask the panelists, how can the United States help tackle institutional corruption in our own hemisphere? Is it possible to use the economic influence of our great country in the hemisphere in order to channel those countries into real and substantive democratic reforms? And is organized crime and a plummeting economy directed by Venezuela a security risk for the entire hemisphere, specifically for Caribbean countries? And I'll leave it to anyone who would like to testify. Dr. Ellis, I think you were going to testify.
Thank you. A wonderful question. For me, actually, corruption is one of the centers of gravity for attacking the real malaise that is going on across the Americas right now. If I could quickly make another observation that, as was rightfully pointed out, Venezuela not only is a tragedy for its own people, but is also a tragedy for the rest of the region. We can talk, for example, about Limsi Salazar, who recently came as cooperating with U.S. authorities and has made the claim that the current head of the Venezuelan parliament, Diosdado Cabello, is actually the head of the largest narco-trafficking organization, Cartel de los Soles. Essentially, the record amounts of cocaine that we're seeing coming through the Caribbean, as well as destabilization of the Colombian borderlands, other places like that. Venezuela is not simply a problem for its own people. But with respect to corruption itself, there are, in part, technical solutions that our own engagement through state and DOD can support. There are some interesting things with respect to both institutionalization of things like lie detector tests, but also institutional support. You had had a case in Honduras not too long ago where a significant portion of the police force was identified as being corrupted, and none of them were fired. So I think it's a combination of diplomatic pressure and others. But also I think a holistic whole-of-government solution is critical, because corruption is important to reestablishing the connection between the citizens and the government. Alvaro Uribe was mentioned before, and to me, part of the magic of what the success of Colombia is, and our Mexican allies hate when we gringos talk to them about the lessons of Colombia. But to me, part of it was the systemic concept, the idea that you have to reestablish the faith of the government in its people. And with that, you get intelligence and investment in everything else. And so as I look at some of our plans, one of the things that I think is very important is that we not just add together individual programs, but that we think about how are we going little by little to fight this systematically.
Thank you so much, and I regret that I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.